Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar called Protecting Your Organisation from Phishing Attacks in 2023. This webinar will examine the phishing lifecycle and how you can best build a resilient approach to phishing defence and how to develop the correct cyber infrastructure to stay ahead of a breach in 2023. So leading us through this conversation today is Tonya Dudley, our VP and Chief Information Security Officer here at Cofence, as well as Marcus Vogt, our Customer Solutions Architect from Cofence's APAC team. So welcome, Tonya and Marcus. Thank you both for giving us your time today and your expertise. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to ask any questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A box in the corner of your console. We'll take some time for Q&As at the end. And this webcast is being recorded, so everyone here today will receive a link to the recorded session once the webcast has concluded. And finally, on the right-hand side of your console, you will find some links to some of our most recent educational resources for you to click, review, and enjoy. So that's just some of the housekeeping out of the way, but we'll get things kicked off and we'll pass it over to you, Tonya. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, and thanks for letting me kind of be a part of your day as I head into my evening here in the U.S. I just real quick want to just talk for a few minutes on who Cofence is. If you haven't heard of us, we have over 10 years of experience in stopping email security threats. So our main focus is email security past the gateway. Our co-founders, Rohit Balani, who is our CEO, and former CTO, Aaron Higby, they really pioneered this whole methodology of simulating a phishing attack as a training mechanism to be able to get your users to be prepared to identify threats that are hitting their inbox. And I'll talk a minute on how those products have evolved, but we have over 800 simulations. A majority of those are all based on real phishing threats that we see today, and that is the only thing that we use to make any new templates that go into our platform. We do have a little bit of content related to WhatsApp and SMS, as we know, you're being targeted with those things. We have a little bit of a simulator, but we know that phishing, email phishing, is really the number one threat vector that organizations are dealing with today. So that really is our focus and why we kind of sit there, but not dismissing the fact that there's other threats hitting too. With over 35 million reporters deployed across the globe, it really helps us get insight into visibility into what is the phishing threat landscape. And you're going to see many of those today as I kind of walk through some of the threats that we're seeing. As we started training organizations and users, we started to realize that there's something missing of this picture, right? Both our co-founders were pen testers and really cared about that technology side of the threat. And so that was when they realized, hey, we need to make it easy for users to report that, which is where we launched our reporter button many, many years ago. And then with that now came this burden of, okay, our SOC teams, they need to be able to, how do they respond to those and mitigate those and really analyze those? And that's where Triage and Vision comes in. And just those two products, we really are, again, sitting past the gateway, helping you deal with those threats that hit the inbox post-gateway. Thousands of global customers, that really helps give all of our customers benefit from the insight of what we see. It's not uncommon for us to see one threat hitting one industry, one organization, and then also seeing those same IOCs hit across several others. So as I mentioned, our product kind of evolved, right? So we have those insights as to what's hitting our organizations today with those 35 million reporters that we have deployed. Our Protect product is about to launch in a few weeks, where we really use some AI and machine learning technology to be able to help identify those threats at the moment that they hit the inbox, really helping organizations defend against those threats before the user even has a chance to interact with it. Same with our Vision product, feeding those IOCs that we have from our human vetted intelligence into all of our products, whether it's Protect and Vision or Triage to help you detect those messages. And then again, I kind of mentioned Phish Me and Reporter, right, helping you really prepare your end users to be able to identify those threats that are going to hit those their inboxes. And then triage and vision is really helping your security teams being able to mitigate and respond to those threats, allowing you to do threat hunting and proactively defend against any of these phishing threats that you might see today. So now I'm going to kind of lead into my sweet spot is looking at the phishing threat landscape, and it's something I really do enjoy getting to be able to dig into these. It's not uncommon for me to dig into some of our customers' triage instances to see what are they seeing. I was a customer since 2011 of Cofense products, and having seen triage from its inception, I'm kind of a little bit passionate about this. So business email compromise, in some regions, it's referred to as CEO fraud. But what this is an email that's asking for an action, no links in it, no attachments. And we see, at least in the US, and I know this is a global issue, that we know that the United States Secret Service is partnering with many law enforcement agencies around the globe to try and attack this threat. But oftentimes it's asking for, hey, I need you to get me some gift cards. Hey, I need you to change my direct deposit. And then what we are really seeing them evolve with is, hey, I need you to change or update the vendor master file with this new banking information. And so, oftentimes we see phishing, an email like this on the left-hand side. So, it's just, hey, I need a copy of our accounts receivable register, and that will give the threat actor, amounts that are due, maybe some invoice numbers, some contact information. So then with that, then they can then launch. These two are not connected, but this is similar to how this attack would happen. Now they could go after the organization that is due, needs to pay that money, to then now, hey, this invoice that you haven't paid yet, or it's past due, they've tweaked with they play with this language here in the lingo to be able to get past any of those AI detection mechanisms that we might have in place, right, to try and automate this, or how do we block these things? It becomes really difficult. And I'll get into why that is in a moment. But then you might see this one here saying, right, I need to send a direct deposit ASAP. I haven't received this invoice. They're creating that sense of urgency. You need to pay this, or we're going to stop doing business, or we're going to cut off your services. And we are seeing this threat growing, and the number of losses that we are seeing across the globe when it comes to this particular threat. So at Cofense, we see that credential phish is the top threat that we see. And when it comes to credential phishing, a lot of times it's containing a link, but oftentimes we see these HTML files. And this particular one is a secure HTML file, right? Because that makes us feel warm and fuzzy that we're supposed to do this, to interact with this file, right? So, the user opens this file, they're, put in their credentials. And all of these email images that I'm showing you, these are all that were found in our by our Phishing Defense Center. That users had reported because they recognize something doesn't feel right about this. In the past, we used to say, look for grammar errors, there's the emotion, those other things still maybe kind of hold true. But when with a credential phish, we know that they are logging in with those credentials. They capture those credentials from the user who's entered them, in a potential phishing threat. They've then gone in and added auto forwarding rules to their Outlook, right? So if I put in a rule to forward messages out, then now in those BEC attacks, we can see where they're scraping these emails and they're leveraging those to further attacks, and get information specific about the organization, right? So now they don't have to always ask for that AR register. If they get credentials to somebody in finance, they can put in rules that say auto forward any messages that have invoice or purchase order or quote, things that, a finance person might send off, that they can now leverage and then reuse those messages. So those BEC attacks really become harder to detect. Is this legitimate? And we do see them spoofing domain names and that sort of thing to go to an extreme sophistication, because they are still stealing millions of dollars when it comes to these types of threats. So if you as a defender are finding that your user is reporting this and they say, well, I think I gave away my credentials, I'm going to go ahead and, have them reset their password. Not only that, then now you need to also make sure that they're looking in their auto forwarding rules and make sure there's nothing in there that they don't recognize, or that they're not sending, that messages aren't being sent outside the organization. If you can, set that at a global level, right? If there's ways that you can just say, we don't have any reason for anyone to have auto forwarding rules, besides the fact that you're also leaking data outside your organization, then that's a good way to also defend against this particular threat from happening as well. HTML files are the top file type that we do see. If a user sees this, they're kind of a little bit confused. I know when I first looked at this, I was like, what? It's an MP3 file? But really what this is left to right, right to left, where they're changing that file name. But when the file opens up, it actually opens up as an HTML file, because you can see that they reverse that. Now, I did say that we aren't seeing many grammar, but we do see occasionally that there will be some. And it wouldn't surprise me if they've done this because it has the Microsoft logo in there. We can, put some rules around. If it says Microsoft, but it's not actually coming from a Microsoft domain, then let's block it. But then now they've added some nuances to this, right? So it's notification has 2 I's in there. The voicemail, that's not really an I, that's a lowercase l, right? So there's some other nuances in there that they put in there. But a good, well-trained user would detect something doesn't feel right with this, so I'm going to report this. We also see them using these images that actually are not images, which is oftentimes why, one of the controls that we have put in place for years is to block images from auto downloading, right? And this is a really good example of why that is, right? So they have this PDF, it looks like a PDF, it's not a PDF, it's just an image that has a link embedded in it. And then we have, not only is HTML the top file threat that is getting through, but it also is now shifting to loading malware. So now, they've learned that HTML files, they're getting past those segs. And so now let's see how they can stuff their malware loaders in there, or putting links in there that take it to a site that will auto download those, that malware as well. Keyloggers, this is a very common thing that we see, right? These become very valuable in their attempt to deploy ransomware. So this one I thought was interesting, which is another reason why having an IOC intelligence feed is critical, because there's nuances about this, right? It becomes more than just looking at each individual email. I found this particular one, and then I noticed that there were several other customers that had a very similar email. And if you look at this PO number or RFQ number in the top, it stays consistent. We have this link at the bottom that is also an indicator, and then the person who's sending it, right? And so then we see, oh, look, all they did was change the RFQ number, but the link at the bottom still stays the same. And then I found this one that was a different language, and I thought, oh, maybe it was just the local language that translated it. But then I went, no, because Kareem, hold on, I gotta rebuild this. Kareem doesn't translate to Sergio, right? So again, using those same indicators, but then just using some different message context within the message. So that's where having those IOC feeds can really help benefit you to block these types of threats. So what else do we know that's getting through? They're going to continue to maneuver their ways around our technology. And so one wave that we've seen happen in the last probably month or so is using OneNote files, right? I'm not sure if you've ever sent a OneNote file to anybody externally, but I haven't even sent one internally. I used to share my personal status report with my boss, and I would send him a link to my OneNote, but never would I email him that OneNote. So we are starting to see threat actors using this, and this is not credential phish, right? These are loading very nasty malware that is very dangerous to organizations. And I did want to highlight one of the account takeover emails that we came across. I believe this was last year, 2 years ago now, but we do have a blog post on this that I think the team can send on to you, where they were spoofing the Australian government. And it's not uncommon for us to see these types of threats hitting our customers. And so as I get ready to hand this off to Marcus, I do want to, I always get asked, but okay, can you explain to me like what phishing emails deliver ransomware? So I always like to use this chart because it's a really good flow of how a ransom attack really happens, right? So if you look at the first box on the top left-hand corner and then kind of follow that path around, there's several steps that happen in between there. And sometimes that can be days, weeks, or even months between that initial, hey, I'm going to launch a phishing attack going after credentials. I'm going to look for some besides exploiting some vulnerabilities that might happen, lateral movement, they do that with gathering those credentials, right? And so before they actually get to that deploying the malware. So I just wanted to really emphasize that first box of there's a potential that that's when the malware is entering your network or your systems because of that phishing email that may have hit your user's inbox. So that's why, as Marcus is going to kind of talk through that whole timeline around identifying that phish and doing some remediation before the threat actors can actually execute their mission. So Marcus, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, Tonya. My section covers how we help as dealing with the phishing threats. So and this is a summary of what Tonya's covered. So, oops, let's turn on the video as well. So what you can see is the threat actors have a number of tactics, techniques, and practices which they use to get to us vulnerable humans, right? And so what you'll see is, and one thing I love about the threat actors is they now see this as a profession and like to call themselves extortion engineers, right? Which is amazing to me. But what we have on the right-hand side are the delivery mechanisms. So as Tonya was saying, they have a broadcast type attacks, so large-scale attacks, and then we also have highly targeted attacks, right? And then below that, you'll also see morphing attacks, so that they understand that we have defensive systems in places, and so they will change parts of things like the URLs they're sending, the messages themselves. So they're adapting those messages in real time to adapt to the defenses that they are encountering, right? And on the left-hand side, you've got the content that is being delivered to the end users. We talked about the ransomware, the Trojans, and those sorts of things, the credential phishing, and the business email compromise. Okay, so one of the things that's really important to understand is that we've had in the olden days, we had a fortress-based security model, right? Where we put fences and walls around things and feel safe and content that we were, we could sleep at night. But what's changed over time is a move to time-based security. And time-based security addresses the dream that a defense has no vulnerabilities and that the business will not change to introduce new vulnerabilities into the organization. So in summary, time-based security assumes that attackers will find a way, and it is the job of us defenders to interrupt that process, right? So with that in mind, and as Tonya said, there's a process that these guys go through to execute their attacks on our organizations, right? And this example is based on the United States Department of Energy model to describe the process. There's a number of them out there. There's the MITRE ATT&CK framework and others, right? And those steps are what they're looking to execute to maximize the time that they can get in, maximize the time they spend inside your network, taking advantage of your resources, right? And that's the exposure time. And the longer the exposure time, the worse the outcome for the defender, right? However, the defender is not helpless and not sitting idly by. They're an active participant in this story, right? They have their own systems and practices to prepare and interrupt an attacker. Okay. And so what we're doing with our preparation and prevention is buying the most precious thing, which is protection time. All right. This is where the attacker has no intrusion into our systems, and maximizing protection time is a key function of any security practice. But as we said, with time-based security, we assume that they'll eventually make that through one day somehow. Okay, so what we then have is, okay, if we assume that they're going to make their way past the protective controls, our job is to find or detect those threats that have made it through as quickly as we can, because the faster we do that, the faster we can repel them from our organization, implement mitigations and recovery, right? So our fundamental job in the phishing space is to maximize protection time and also reduce the detection time as much as we can. So shrink it down as fast as possible. Okay. So what is the journey we go on for a phishing defense system as a whole, right? So what we have traditionally is our preparation, right? Which is what buys us our protection time. So we have security awareness training, so us humans know what a threat looks like, right? And we then verify that through simulations, right? So not only do we train them, we verify that those skills are accurate. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. And last but not least, we make sure it's really quick and easy for us humans to report this, because if you make it difficult to report a threat, it doesn't get analyzed. And that's what we're hopefully aiming for. So we're looking for unknown threats or day zero threats, right? Which is different to day zero vulnerabilities, right? These are these messages that are unique, haven't been seen before for your organization, right? Our job is to capture that through the reporting process, triage them. So let's look at the most risky ones first. We analyze them. Okay, what's the nature of this threat, so that we can then produce indicators of compromise or IOCs. And additionally, we provide feedback to our users who've reported this, whether they've been successful in identifying a hostile threat, because any system without a positive feedback loop ultimately devolves into chaos, right? So once we've done the activity of analyzing this and we've produced an indicator of compromise, a signature, if you will, it now moves from a day zero or unknown threat to a known threat. And what we can do there is auto quarantine or remove all instances of that threat from your mail store. So hopefully if one person gets that message and there's multiple instances of that, you've removed all of those threats straight away, which is fantastic. It also then goes into threat hunting, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but basically there's always, with that time-based security, there's always a bit of latency in that system or delay between when that new threat is converted from a day zero or unknown to a known threat. And there's a window of time where users could have clicked on those links or performed those actions. So what do you do if somebody clicked on a credential theft link? Right? So do you reset their passwords? Do you kick off training and so forth? And what we realized is that you want to feed those things back, right? So in particularly around if you have a known threat, you also want to feed that back into your simulations so that they're relevant to what you're actually seeing in your organization. And same again for if you have a known threat, and you see that signature come through again, you don't want to waste your time analyzing that again. You just want to quickly, readily identify that as this is the same sort of attack, and let's remove that out of the hostile environment. But what we worked out from a collective perspective is that if we operate together, what you'll see is you may see a threat before I do, and as long as you've identified and provided that indicator of compromise, we can now share that. And that becomes really important because now we've got this collective defense model of millions of end users and we're processing millions of messages, we can share those quickly and easily and protect you before it even hits your, your end user eyeballs, which is really, really important. And then there's the next level of this, which is, okay, our resources for, security analysis and so forth are often very difficult to find and retain, train, all of those important things. But not only that, they could be tasked with other issues. And that means you could be introducing additional delays into the system, right? And because time is so important to this, often customers want to have a chauffeur type service where they can offload that to experts and process that. And it's our managed phishing defense centers that create all of this collective defense. And last but not least, we have another solution which Tonya talked about earlier, which is a lighter touch service, which is doesn't give you that full chauffeur service, but it also gives you a level of protection as part of that. Okay, so we have a little questionnaire, so just so that we can share where people are at in terms of their readiness for dealing with phishing defense. So the question is, do you have day -1, day 0, or day +1 message controls? So as we said, for day -1, we're not talking about the secure email gateway. We're talking about, do you have your security awareness training, your simulations, and your reporting availability, making it easy for users to report potentially malicious emails. And then there's the next one, which is, do you have a process, systems, tools in place to deal with your unknown threats once they've been reported by the users? And are you providing a feedback mechanism to your end users and your downstream systems once you've identified that or turned that unknown threat into a known threat? Right, and one thing that's really important to notice is that often reported emails, they aren't always malicious emails that users are reporting. We see, I believe it's roughly about 10% that of reported emails are malicious, and that over-reporting is good. I mean, you want to, it's better to find the malicious email than have it ignored. And then there's the day +1 process. So once you've identified a malicious message, have you got a process in place to auto-respond to that and quarantine it? Or are you just starting out your journey and it's none of the above? Hopefully you guys have all had a chance to respond to that, and we'll go through to the results. So yeah, it's really interesting, and this is where you see a really strong emphasis on starting from the left, because you want to start with the protection side of the fence first. Buy yourself the protection time. So start with your day -1. But what's really interesting is the collective defense model allows you to buy protection time even faster than the security awareness training. And the reason we say that is because you can remove the threats from the inbox, from the collective defense model. As long as one set of eyeballs has seen it, then we can share that out. And that then means you've got that protection straight away, right? So it's worth being aware of that and thinking about that as an option in terms of how your security posture can be improved by leveraging that collective defense model. Okay, on to the next story. So we talked a bit about the time-based security, but what happens is what we're looking at from once we've gone past the protection time, we're now into how do we minimize the protection time and what do we see in terms of the constraints around that. So obviously you have to collect the right data first. So making sure you've got the data inputs from your network, your endpoints, your apps, your messages, and most importantly, the humans, right? And you've got lots and lots of events. And what you're doing is funneling this down, and so that you can get down to real actionable items. And the excuse me, and the problem we have is if you have a bottleneck or a clog in the this funnel, you have a much longer exposure time and potentially missed threats. So in conversations with many customers, particularly those who have manual processes for how they triage their potentially malicious emails, what will happen is they'll prioritize. They'll say, okay, this looks serious, so let's use high, medium, and low risk. They will process the high risk items, but they won't process the medium or low risks just because they don't have the capacity to do so. So it's really important to understand, is there a choke point in the process, or is there a capacity problem in there as well, right? And this is where this model can really help. So this is where we talked about the time-based security, we talked about time-based operations. This is how we talk about the time-based remediation. So once we've turned a day zero threat into a known threat, we have a day zero indicator, right? So the process is, let's kick in your security incident response process, let's lock the firewall down or the endpoint controls, all of those sorts of things, so that if somebody clicks on that message, then we know that it has been blocked. But that's not the story as it's in its entirety. So what you then want to do, and we talked a bit about this before, is we want to search backwards in time, right? We want to say, okay, it took us an hour, for argument's sake, to detect this brand new threat. Did anybody click on it? Did anybody run this malware, right? Because now we want to have a conversation on, okay, we can see that this many people clicked on this link. We now need to reset their passwords. We now need to train them, right? And but wait, there's more. So, but you also have the future side of things, right? So I've set in a protective control. I want to make sure that if somebody hits those protective controls, I'm being notified about that, because there's been a path around the protections we put in our mail store. So a good example of that is if they've leveraged an alternative communications medium. So for example, I might have been hit by a Gmail. So I protected the corporate email store, but somebody sent it to Gmail or some social media framework, right? So it's important to have that complete stack, right? And what we recommend is, so you have your triage process, which will detect those threat indicators on the fly as they're unique to you. But what you can do is integrate our threat intelligence feed, which is available via REST API, into your existing practices. So this becomes a light touch exercise for you. So we have integrations for many different types of SIEMs, SOARs, and threat intel platforms, because, and this is why, I haven't talked about this earlier, but this is why it's so important for us to have really, really highly accurate threat intelligence in our feed. The reason behind that, and the way we do that, is, first of all of our threat intel is human vetted. So we verify a threat analyst is verifying every single threat IOC that we then share with the rest of the community. But the reason it's so important to have really, really accurate data, and ours is 99.995% accurate, is you can automate this stuff. You don't have false positives in there, so that you can automatically start searching. You can automatically start quarantining those messages because you know they're valid threats, right? And again, it's that same challenge. Do you have the resources and so forth? Now, whilst it depends on the scale of the organization, and this is where we work with our partners and so forth, if a customer wants to have a SOC as a service, or if they're large enough to have their own service. But we provide guidance and tools, or the data and the integrations, to make this process as light touch as possible. Okay. So for the next question, and again, it's the same question so that we can have a discussion around this. So do you have, your day -1, your day 0, and your day +1 remediation controls in your security operations center? So for example, as we literally talked it through, when you see a new malicious message come in, once you've pulled out the IOCs, are you scanning your SIEM for the last day, 24 hours? To see if anybody has clicked on that, and you have a process to then handle that. Same thing for That new ISC comes in for day 0. Do you have automated integrations to your endpoint and network such that you're closing the firewalls, making sure that you've got those malicious file signatures on your endpoint control systems? And last but not least, and in some ways most importantly, are you providing that feedback to your security awareness training and your simulations as part of that? Because as we said earlier, it's not enough just to train people. You have to verify their skill level by running simulations using current data. That's one thing I didn't mention earlier, I don't think, which is our threat intel feed is continuously updating our simulations in our PhishMe product to make sure that we have a library of current and accurate and meaningful simulations. The only thing I'd comment on there is making sure that you have your day 0 threats. Hold on, I think that's the wrong results. So I'm going to pass on that. I will come back and do a follow-up item on that, guys. Okay, so key takeaways. So phishing defense is a system, not a point solution, right? So our whole existence as a company is the dream that the fortress mentality of the secure email gateway would protect us is being revealed as an illusion, right? So it is a system and it's only as good as its weakest and slowest link, right? And the slowest bit is where we tie into the time-based security, right? User readiness, making sure that they're up to date in terms of not just their training, but being verified through current and up-to-date simulations really impacts the time to detect, right? And we're trying to reduce the detection time as much as possible. We also have a challenge in terms of our Security Operations Center, the availability and throughput will also impact our time to detect, respond, and recover, right? And that's where both the automation side and potential outsourcing becomes really, really important. And what we want to have is a system that reduces the burden on all stakers as much as possible, right? And so that's where we talk about the proactive removal of threats using our collective defense data is critical. So if we've removed the threat because one person has seen that in the environment globally, then we've saved everybody's time by not having to look at that again. And one of the things that I didn't talk about earlier is our security analysts will unpack that malicious content. And what you'll see is often there's not just the link that you see in the email, that'll then take you to a web page that doesn't look too bad, right? And then there's another link that goes to that, which is, oh, okay, this was the form for please fill it in, but then it clicks to, oh, you need to put in your credentials. And then there's a link behind that, which is what actually stores the credentials. Our security analysts pull that apart and give you all 3 tiers of those indicators of compromise. And so that's where it becomes really important for not just pulling out the message from the mail store, but you have all 3 tiers to go and search backwards through your SIEM to see if anybody's clicked on those. Because what we'll see is that the first 2 tiers will change very frequently, but the 3rd tier where they store the passwords, that tends to stay around for quite some time. Okay, and with that, we're on to our Q&A, I think. Back to you, Will.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Tonya. Yeah, of course, we have the Q&A box open if anyone would like to ask any questions for either of our presenters today. I think we have a couple that have come through already, so thank you for your comments and questions. The first one we have is what techniques do threat actors use to get around traditional defenses? This might be one for you, Tonya, if you are happy to take that one.
Sure. I think you saw quite a few examples that we went over today, right? They're always looking for innovative ways. Like I said, HTML files is a big way that they're doing those. They'll also hide links in PDFs. We're seeing a number of PDFs that have malicious links embedded in those, right? Users think, oh, it's a PDF, it's safe. So they're always looking for ways that they can bypass any of those scanning mechanisms. We also have seen an uptick in malware this past year where what we call is geofencing. So maybe if I send something to Will, it doesn't open for him, but if I send it to somebody in maybe the UK, it opens for them. So there's this ability to be able to detect where is, what location is this particular person in. Maybe even we've even seen ones that look for a particular keyboard language. So looking for, maybe Portuguese, right? So targeting somebody in Brazil, that's, a very specific one. So we are seeing more of this geofencing, which makes it all that more human vetted and enrichment that we send it off to our, from our phishing defense center and onto our intelligence team, where they kind of dig a little bit deeper and use some of the other tools in their toolbox, right, to analyze that phish to see, is it executing, or is it just because of some characteristic that they're looking for to execute. So look forward to our annual report that's coming out in a couple of weeks, and we have a lot of kind of what we've seen over the last year and how that's continuing to evolve. And those OneNotes, that's a new tactic, right? So I envision, and actually I just saw one that popped up today where they're using a different file type. So I'm envisioning they're going to continue to find all those odd file types to get through until, you can put a rule in place to block that.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, the latest stuff I've seen coming through on the geofencing is because these threat actors are interested in protecting their intellectual property and the websites behind them, because they cost them to spin them up and so forth, is that they're not only disabling it if it isn't from their target area. What they're doing is redirecting it to the legitimate site if it's not from the targeted area. And someone who's not experienced in hunting these things down will think, oh, okay, that looks like a legitimate email, when in fact it's a malicious email that's specifically targeted for particular people. And so they're really becoming very, very sophisticated in the way they do some of those things, and leveraging legitimate services as well. Mm-hmm. So there's they will consume various public tools to send malicious emails as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And like you said, a lot of those examples will be shown in the annual report, which we're doing a webinar on in a few weeks' time. So if you haven't already, please register, and we'll make sure you get the link to view the webinar and view the PDF once it's ready. Another question we have is, what proportion of malicious emails are actually day zero?
So I'll grab that one. Yeah, so what we see, and again, we're seeing a shift from the traditional broadcast to a lot more targeted emails. So we're seeing about 60% of the malicious emails we're picking up are broadcast type attacks or common across more than one customer. And we're seeing about 40% is individually targeted. And it's really getting quite sophisticated in terms of they will, again, you can see it in terms of the maturity of the threat actor. They will start knocking on the door quietly to a couple of users to see if it gets through, if it makes it, and then they'll start broadening their attack out as well. So yeah, you need both the collective defense model and making sure that your end users are aware and trained, and make sure you've got an effective and efficient triage process.
Sure thing. And this is actually a similar question, so thanks for whoever asked this. What is the average proportion of reported emails that are actually processed by the SOC?
Okay, so we talked about that earlier. So this is where the capacity or the choke points in security operations can change the amount of emails. We talked about an example of they only processed the high and let the medium and low go through. Typically, we see about in the field, it's around about 50% of the malicious emails or the potentially malicious emails are being processed in a timely fashion.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Well, if we didn't get to answer your question today, we'll make sure that we will follow up post-webinar with a response from someone from our team. Again, thank you all for taking part today, to our panelists and to everyone who tuned in. We think we got some really good insights from this webinar. So hopefully we'll be doing a few more in the coming months. And of course, we have the annual report webinar coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So please tune into that. I think we'll have even more insights to talk about then and more examples to report on, as worrying as they can be. So if there are no more questions, we'll give you back some time for the hour. But yeah, thank you again, everyone, for taking part today, and we'll be in touch again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.